on this rehab topic of double A and what it is, I want to say that, well, people say, um right now I'm in a group, a different entire group from all the other groups that I've been in, because all the groups that I've been in have been groups like rehabs, people with drug addiction, and different rules, different ways of being. Some, like I say, with this six-pointed star. I've seen a couple of rehabs like that, and they all have the 12-step program, but they have different rules and they don't talk to each other. And like I said, the most famous one was this original Bill and Bob Alcoholic Anonymous logo, right? And so they say that you're anonymous, but how could you not talk about it? I'm not gonna, I'm not like, they have these videos out there, and so they say that they're anonymous, but they're not anonymous. Like, you could look them up and they're there, and so this is my personal experience with double A, and it's what I want to say, and I think it's that it's in my Fifth Amendment to be able to say, right, and be able to express how I feel over the topic, right. And well, like I said, right now I'm in a different group that is also Alcoholics Anonymous, uh, and it has the 12-step program on the wall. So how would you say it? They say I can't talk about it, but it's called Alanon. It's called Alanon. It's for people that live and grow up with family members that are drug addicts, alcoholics, and that, kids, for the most part, kids that grow up with, you know, in between all the drug use, either their parents or uh, brother or sister starts using drugs, and it affects them, and it affects them, it affects the person, it affects their lifestyle, if it affects their life, what I'm saying. If if a family is sober, and how would you say it, is completely sober, has uncles and aunts that are completely sober, the experience that the person is going to live, a kid or a boy or a girl growing up in a family like that, is going to be completely different. If you grow up with one uncle, two uncles, or three uncles that drink, and etc., 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 your experience of life is going to be different. If you grow up with your dad or your mom being an alcoholic, your experience of life is going to be different. If you grow up with your parents being crackheads, or what I'm saying, heroin addicts or prostitutes, your experience of life is going to be different, you know? And so this group, Alanon, helps you, you know, cope with, you know, people that are around you that are drug addicts. It helps you understand that it's not their fault, because they're drug addicts, because they're sick. It's not their fault. They're sick people. It's a sickness. That's what the group shows, that it's not so much of an addiction or so much of a pleasure, that they get out of it, you know, but more of a sickness, so you should treat them like patients, not like uh, drug addicts, because there's a different approach to it. You know, you have to approach the situation differently, and so I imagine that people growing up, with drug addicts, with alcoholics, they get agitated. Like, I get agitated because I can't stand it, I can't tolerate it, I can't tolerate stupidity, you know. I just can't, you know. And so I imagine that they get agitated impulsively. They get agitated, and they don't know. They don't even know. You know, unaware, completely, and that's what causes these conflicts in between families. That that have people that are doing drugs, you know, because they waste their money on it, and because of this and because of that, and there's a list of reasons and how people have how I mean, if you're to go to a police department and you're to how would you say it, look up the reasons, look up the files of the conflicts that have arisen because of drugs and alcohol, you know, it'll be there in plain sight. It'll be there in plain sight because of this and because of that, because of stupid things, very stupid things. And I guess you could say they're all very stupid. They're all very stupid. So, so you're to say, so what seems to be the problem? You know, what seems to be the problem? In most cases, it's the fact that that one of the spouses is spending a vast amount of money on drugs when they could spend it on something else. That's basically it. But how would you say it? But like I said, then you lead to the conclusion that you know what, you can't do nothing about it. Like, how can you help somebody like for example, a female that's married to a drug addict? How could you help the female when the female is married? You know what I'm saying? She's not gonna leave her husband. You know, and so I don't know. I think that it's very, how would you say it? Interesting on how the program functions. I use the program in a very different aspect because I'm not married to a drug addict, you know. And so I use the program as, how would you say it, as in a very similar way, in a very similar way as these individuals, because most of them, well, are females. But how would you say it? But how would you say it? You know, the way they approach the situation, that you know what, everywhere I go to, everywhere I've been, how I grew up, you know, I grew up in a very similar environment, and you know, and it's like, okay, so I have to accept this, I have to accept this, I have to accept this. And you know, it's very hard to, you know, to accept that you were born into like, you know, into a ghetto. You know, why couldn't you, you know, how many levels of society exist? You know, there's people that don't have to work, that have never worked and will never work in their entire life. You know why? Because parents, as parents, you know what parents do? Their main achievement, their only goal in life is to leave their kids without a worry. You know, that's their main objective, to gather enough for their kids so that their kids are well off. That's the only goal. It's the only goal in life. At least that's what I think. At least that's what I think. And so, so you're born into like the ghetto, you know, like me. You're born into the ghetto, to the lowest part of society, you know, and you have to accept it. And to me, it's very hard, you know, to have to accept, you know, that, you know, I was born into the ghetto, and that to be able to get out, you know, is very difficult when no one wants to help you. You know, it's very difficult to have to accept, you know, that I, for a certain amount of time, and am stuck in a certain phase, a certain scenario in life, and that there's nothing that I can do about it. It's hard to accept. It's hard to accept that life is very much like a program, a process, you know, and that the process takes time. And so it's hard to accept, but that at the end of the day, you say, hey, you know what? I exist. I exist. You know, God has given me life for a reason. And I'm over here worried about, you know, so much worried, but like kind of frustrated of the situation that I find myself in. And then at the end of the day, what am I arguing about? You know, materialistic crap. It seems very, very stupid, you know. And so that's what I wanted to talk about.